Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, February 28th, 2008. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, Chris Colby from Brew Your Own Magazine joins us to give us more information on hop variety alternatives as we learn to deal with the hop situation. Also, Chris talks about batch versus fly sparging and a method that is somewhere in between. If you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. Well, if you've been listening lately, you know that we've been following the efforts in Utah to legalize our beloved hobby in that state. When we last heard from that part of the world, the bill was going up for a vote in a House committee. Well, let's check in with our Utah legal correspondent, Douglas Wawrzynski, for an update. Well, Douglas Wawrzynski, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Well, thanks for having me on again.
You keep making progress, so it's a good thing that you're back on again. You had quite a day last Thursday. Fill us in.
Yeah, it was a fine day for Utah homebrewers. There's some fine people. We, as we spoke about last week, we had a vote before the House Government Operations Committee for Utah legislature. And, it was a rough start. There was an unexpected snowstorm, and come the beginning of the meeting, homebrewers actually outnumbered the number of committee members that had made it in. So certainly this was an important thing to a number of Utah homebrewers, and it was great to see everybody. Fortunately, at the last minute, we had enough committee members make it through the snowstorm to show up, and we had enough of a quorum on the committee where we could expect a vote, which was very important because we did, in fact, have Gary Glass join us from the American Homebrewers Association, and his time was limited, so it was good to make sure we had him speak before a voting committee. But we had Representative Christine Johnson came out and gave an outstanding introduction for the bill. I was really proud of that. And then Mark Alston, the owner of the Beer Nut, got up and spoke before the committee, and followed by a new face, actually, a man who introduced himself as a second-generation homebrewer, got up before the committee and spoke for the homebrewing community. And then, of course, Gary Glass got up and spoke before the committee and did an excellent job. And what was remarkable is that, again, this committee was supposed to be a very tough group of people, but you could actually, sitting in the crowd, you could watch expressions on committee members' faces as their thoughts and understandings about homebrewing began to change. And in the end, despite the fact that there were, maybe a dozen people ready and willing to get up and speak on behalf of homebrewing, the committee, put a stop to it and said, I think we've got it, and we got a unanimous vote. And so we got a favorable recommendation from our committee, and off to the House we go.
Wow, so outstanding. You can't get any better than that.
We really could not have expected a happier day for homebrewing. And this week, we're expecting the vote to happen before the House. And, hopefully it'll happen Wednesday or Thursday when this particular episode airs. And from there, it's off to the Senate, which there's a time. I think our biggest concern right now is the time factor associated with the Utah legislature. It ends March 5th, which is a week from Wednesday, and fortunately, there is some value in having a bill go through this late in the session. Hopefully we'll get a good vote, hopefully tomorrow, which will buy us the most time, out of the House, and then it goes over to the Senate. Traditionally, it would go before a Senate committee, and they would have to approve it and then send it on to the Senate. But I think in speaking with Representative Johnson's assistant, my understanding is at this point in the legislative session, they will actually send this straight over to the Senate floor for an up or down vote to try and make sure the docket's cleared before the session's over for the year. And then from there, hopefully, we'll get final approval, and there's a very good hope that Utah homebrewers will have their own homebrewing statute.
That would be outstanding. And I read in Tech Talk this week that there are stirrings down in Alabama as well. So, it could be that the two of the remaining 5 states who haven't ratified homebrewing legislation could fall here shortly, and that would be a wonderful thing.
Well, I'll tell you, if Utah can do it, anybody can do it. This has been a great opportunity. I've gotten I've learned quite a bit about the way the state legislature works, and something like we spoke about last week. I've really become very optimistic about. You give a representative of the people a reason to vote in favor of something, and they will do it. It's people. The inclination is to think, well, we haven't had a home brewing statute all this time, and I just don't think it's going to happen. And the temptation is to be very cynical about the approach. But the reality is, we've seen it. I've seen it before in my own eyes. You help someone understand what home brewing is all about, and by golly, the legislature will say, hey, I've got no reason to vote against this. This is going to make some people happy, and they let it roll. So, again, if Utah can do it, there is certainly hope for future states that want to get this thing rolling.
Well, I've got my fingers crossed. I'm knocking wood, and I'm throwing salt over my shoulder. Whatever I can do to help this, to give good karma or whatever it is, go in your direction. And we appreciate your help in coming on here and urging other homebrewers in Utah to talk to their legislators. And we wish you the best of luck, and please keep us posted.
Oh, we certainly will. You've been a great help in getting the word out. I know that, like last week, we were focusing on the House representatives, certainly going forward. Any Utahns that can get out there and start writing their Senate representatives to put the support behind it once it gets that far. And, I got to be really thankful for all the support that I've had from your podcast and the American Homebrewers Association. The homebrewing community is really pulled together. We're a great group of people. Responsible drinkers, and we have a great community. So I think that this is a great example of how a community like this can pull together.
Excellent. Thanks, Douglas.
Thank you.
And this just in this morning, the Utah Home Brewing Bill has passed the State House by a vote of 55 yay, 13 nay, and 7 abstaining. So on to the State Senate. Thanks again to Douglas for keeping us posted. And thanks to all of you homebrewers out there who've been contacting your representatives. Now you've got to go to work on your state senators. Get that thing passed. We got a lot of stuff this week, so let's jump quickly into the mailbag. Craig from the Brew Bubbas emailed me to say that they're going to be hosting a homebrew competition over there at the Brew Bubbas podcast. All the beers for the Brew Bubbas contest will have a starting gravity of at least 1070, so big beers. One of the prizes will be the brewing of the winning beer at a brew pub. So if you're interested, check out the Brew Bubbas podcast for more details. I got a question from David in Lowell, Arkansas. That's not far from where I am. David says, I've used 3 of the Trappist yeasts from White Labs and 1 dry ale yeast. The dry ale yeast starts so much quicker, 24 or 36 hours quicker. I'm wondering if the dry ale yeast is showing the benefits of evolution and the hundreds of selective experiments by scientists over the past 150 years. Well, David, I suspect if you're getting that much difference in lag time before fermentation, it's more a matter of quantity and not necessarily quality. Whenever I use liquid yeast, I found that it's most beneficial to make a starter of at least a quart, and that will give you a bigger amount of pitchable yeast, and it should cut down on the amount of time before you see activity. It's extremely important that you get that activity started, especially if you're seeing 36 hours lag time. You need to cut that down to avoid infection. Get that thing going. It could be that your yeast is a little long in the tooth and needs to be revitalized. Coincidentally, I'm posting an episode of Basic Brewing Video this week where I take a vial of liquid yeast that was 3 months past its expiration date, and I build it up into a nice pitchable starter, so you might want to check that out for some tips. Starters not only build up the amount of yeast that you have, they also help you check the viability of your yeast, and they let you make sure that your yeast isn't contaminated, because you can taste them. Make sure they taste good before you pitch them into your beer. So I think they're a great idea. I encourage you to find out about starters if you don't know about them. Ari from Cleveland wrote after he heard Kirk from Germany a couple of shows ago talking about making a big starter from a packet of yeast and then dividing it up into smaller bottles to make starters later on for more batches of beer. Well, Ari says, if I'm only putting 8 ounces of the starter in each 12-ounce bottle, will they be safe? Do you think that if I put the bottles of mini starter right into the fridge, they will be at risk of exploding? Well, Ari, if it were me, I'd invest in a stopper and airlock for each of those little mini starters instead of capping them. That's what Charlie Papazian does in The Complete Joy of Home Brewing. And that way you won't have to worry about exploding bottles, and you won't have to worry about mixing up your starters with the rest of your beer, so that if your company comes over and grabs what they think is a beer out of the fridge, they won't be drinking your starter. I've received a lot of email lately, and I appreciate all of it. But as I said before, we're a little short on time this week, so let's jump right into our interview with Chris Colby, editor of Brew Your Own Magazine, on hops and hybrid sparging. Well, Chris Colby, welcome back to Basic Brewing Radio.
Hello, James.
How are you surviving the hop crisis?
Oh, pretty good. I've got quite a few in my freezer right now, so I'm not hurting.
You're a hoarder, so you haven't. The hop crisis hasn't hit you full force yet.
Yeah, I wouldn't say I'm a hoarder. When I heard about the crisis, I bought, I don't know, probably 80% of the amount of hops that I'll use over the next 2 years, and because there was just a couple varieties I thought, if I can get them now, I'm going to. 2009 rolls around and I've still got a bunch in my freezer. I'll just, bring some to my homebrew club meeting and share the wealth, as it were.
There was a page on the Samuel Adams site where apparently Samuel Adams is selling off some of their stockpile of hops to other smaller craft brewers. Did you see that? Yeah,
I did see that. And I forwarded that to Peter Osnoose, my cousin who's a brewer that you interviewed.
Yeah, from Worth Brewing Company, right?
Right.
Yeah, well, hopefully he'll be able to take advantage of that. Half of me says it's a publicity stunt, and the other half says that Jim Cook has a big heart. So
could be both.
Yeah, in the PR business, if you've got a big heart, make all the hay you can from it.
Yeah, why not? I mean, for example, when I talked to Peter, he's going to take advantage of that. He's getting some of their, I think he said their Tettnanger that they offered.
Yeah, they were selling, offering to sell at cost, was it 20,000 pounds of hops?
Yeah, I didn't read it all because it was, just for commercial brewers and not home brewers. But yeah, they were offering to sell off basically hops they didn't think they were ever going to use. Their excess, and if I remember right, it was at cost. So that's nice. I'm sure that's going to help out some people out there looking around for hops.
Pretty good deal.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of the hop crisis, in the March-April issue of Brew Your Own Magazine, on the cover is a giant hop cone with the caption "Hop Survival Guide: Brew Your Way Through the Shortage." So, as promised, you promised us the last time we talked to you that you were going to be doing more on the hop situation and how to cope. What kind of information have you got in this issue?
Yeah, in this issue, we just, we talk a little bit about hop substitutions. The obvious first line of, defense when you're brewing beers and, a hop variety that you're looking for has, gone missing or whatever. The first thing you're going to do is try to find, some sort of reasonable substitute for that. And there's a lot of information out there on, what types of hops are similar and what can be used as a substitute for different varieties of hops. And so we've got a big table, which is, an updated version of our table that was on the web. Just goes through, I think there's 72 varieties of hops there, and, where reasonable substitutes are known, it's given. And there's also just a little bit of information given about the hops too, alpha acids, a little bit of a flavor description when it's known. And we have the hop chart. I also profile 4 of the newer varieties of hops that sort of gained in acreage recently, and since they aren't incredibly popular yet on the commercial side, they're hops that homebrewers are likely to run into. Those are Glacier, Santiam, Sterling, and Vanguard. And so I've got a little profile of those hops and some suggested recipes based on some test brews that I did.
So what are the characteristics of those 4?
Glacier is kind of an interesting hop. It's very it's a low cohumulone hop. It has very like a clean bitterness to it, but it's got some interesting sort of earthy, woody characters in the flavor and aroma. It's a little bit like, and it's sometimes sort of suggested as a substitution for something like Fuggles or Styrian Goldings. Santiam and Sterling are, Santiam is a Tettnang, or a supposed Tettnang substitute. It's a nice sort of, it tastes a lot like a noble hop. It tastes a lot like Tettnanger, a nice spicy hop. Sterling, I found, Sterling is usually cited as a sort of a cross between Sots and Mount Hood. But when I tried, those hops, I found both of those to be very similar. I thought they had a similar sort of Tettnang-y kind of spiciness to them. And then Vanguard is a lot of times, given as a Hallertau substitute, and that was a very, very mild hop. I mean, it smelled really nice, but it was everything, and it was really, sort of refined and subdued, and it was, really, really nice refined characteristics, but everything it didn't, nothing in it stuck out really, really strongly. It would be a really good hop for any sort of, any lager or lightly hopped beer where you want a nice, very refined hop character without any, sort of the rough edges that you would want, in a bigger, hoppier beer.
Now, why can we get these hops and not the others?
I don't know 100% for certain, but new hop varieties are bred all the time, and they get bred, they get tested. When varieties like this get enough support and enough commercial breweries start to show an interest, farmers will start putting in some acreage of these. But some hops, they might initially, some brewery might initially show some interest in one, and then they might pull out, leaving a lot on the market. Or they might, the growers might take a chance on, they've seen or heard about this hop, know that it's a good hop, and sort of take a chance at grow some. There can be a lot of reasons, but basically these are ones that are, for whatever reasons, not in a huge commercial demand right now, but are sort of on the upswing, and we can still the availability of them for homebrewers is quite high.
So they're kind of left on the table after the big scramble for the hops.
Yeah, it's interesting. You might think at sort of first blush that our availability, the hops that we would be able to get would be some function of what's being grown out there. You might think, for example, well, there's a lot of acreage of this kind of hop, then that should be fairly available. And it's really not at all like that. For example, Willamette is a very widely grown hop now. But finding Willamette these days is very, very hard. It's because one or two big breweries basically bought all of it. They had contracted for most of it, and when they found out there was going to be a shortage, they went after the rest of it. So, ironically, some of the hops that are going to be in relative abundance for us are going to be that way because they're small plantings, and that the biggest brewers out there and the big and medium-sized breweries just didn't really pursue those varieties too much.
You've also got an article in here, and I've gotten a lot of inquiries about growing your own hops at home, and we've done a show with Dave Wills of Fresh Hops in the past on the topic. Do you have any information on the availability of rhizomes? Are they going the same way as hops in general, or what's the supply of rhizomes out there?
Well, that's going to be a really interesting question. I mean, there's sort of two opposing forces right now. One is the hop shortage, so a lot of people are going to be, of course, thinking about, well, I want to grow hops. Of course, homebrewers are a small market in this, so even if a large percentage of homebrewers are looking for rhizomes, it's really not a dent in the overall, rhizome availability market. The other thing to consider is that hop farmers are increasingly planting high alpha acreage, and they're ripping out alpha acreage, aroma acreage, to use to plant more high alpha stuff. So you would at least think that if they're taking out, a lot of acreage of aroma hops, they would be smart enough at least to sell the rhizomes.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really have any super hard information on what the availability is. I know that if you go to the Fresh Hops website, they've got a date, March 20th, if I remember correctly, when they're going to start offering hop rhizomes. In the next issue of BYO, or I think even this issue of BYO, you'd think I'd have looked at it by now, but I don't really look at the ads a lot of the time. I think there are a number of places that are offering sort of pre-orders on rhizomes. So there's just some are going to be available, definitely. How many and if it's enough to meet demand is an open question at this point. I sort of think there will be, just because even with an increase in interest in rhizomes, it's not going to be something every home brewer does. We're not a huge contingent out there. So I tend to think you're going to be able to find rhizomes this year.
It only takes one to get a good crop.
Sure.
So
mine are already up, actually.
Yeah, mine were peaking up the other day. I weeded my three little hop plants, and one was peeking its little head up above the ground. Unfortunately, it got nipped. We've had some up and down temperatures lately, so hopefully they will survive the weird temperature fluctuations, and we'll have good hops this upcoming year. But it's fun to do, and we've got a big you've got a big article, not a big article, but you've got an article on hop growing in this issue, and we've got the episode with Dave Wills in the archives. So if you're curious about growing hops at home, check those sources out, and why not give it a shot.
I should also mention we're planning on it's not 100% sure, but we're planning on doing an article on drying hops later in the year. I've done some research on how oasts, the hop drying buildings or whatever, work, and I actually bought a food dehydrator recently, and I'm going to be once my harvest comes in, I'm going to be experimenting with drying hops, and we're going to do an article a little bit on how hops are dried. There are also, sort of interestingly enough, there are some treatments that at least a lot of European hops are given when they're dried, and we're not going to recommend them, but explain what they are in case people are curious.
Well, cool. I will look for that. I have my own method, but maybe we'll talk about that when we talk about your article.
Sure. Yeah, a lot of people just spread them out sort of somewhere where it's relatively warm and relatively dry, and just sort of like drying flowers or whatever, and that works. If you find a low humidity place that's relatively warm, you can and a lot of home hop growers do that. But if you have access to something like a food dehydrator or something that can dry them a little more quickly, you're a little less at the you're less at the mercy of the elements. If there happens to be a humid spell when you're trying to dry your hops or something like that. So we're just going to give an alternative for people who, depending on where they live and how much hops they grow, and certainly if they have any other use for a food dehydrator in their life, maybe finding out that it works well with hops would be helpful to them.
Very cool. Well, I want to move on to the second topic, which has been a lightning rod on at least one online forum that I've read. The article by Steve Hawley on Sparging attracted quite a bit of attention, and what the subtitle of the article is a comparison of batch and continuous sparging. But essentially, what he does is he talks about batch sparging, he talks about continuous sparging, and then he talks about this hybrid sparging method that he uses. So maybe we ought to, not in a great amount of detail because we've done shows on the topic, but for those new to the show, new to the archives, give us a quick rundown on what batch sparging is compared to continuous sparging.
Yeah, basically, when you're done mashing and brewing, you need a way to rinse the remaining sugars from the grain bed. You could, hypothetically just run off your first wort and call that good, but you'd be leaving a lot of extract behind. So, brewers have come up with the idea of sparging, which is you rinse the grain bed with water, and there's a couple ways to do it. The way sort of most commercial brewers do it is with continuous sparging, or as it's sometimes called, fly sparging. Using that, basically, as wort is being run off the grain bed at a certain rate, water is being added to the top of the grain bed at the same rate. So you just sort of continually run off the wort, you continually add water, and then at a certain point you cut off wort collection. With batch sparging, the idea is a little bit different. You would run off the wort completely, then you would add a second dose of sparge water, mix that in, recirculate, and run off the second wort completely. So the key differences are, in continuous sparging, the water level or the liquid level in the lauter tun always stays above the surface of the grain bed. You're adding water to the top, to the surface water on top of the grain bed, and you're running off wort below that. In batch sparging, when you run off the first wort, you run it completely off. Then you add a second batch of sparge water. You can add, you could add a third batch too. The most common home brewing method is one where you add a little bit of sparge water to the first mash to pump up the volume a little bit, run all that off, and then add a volume of water to the second mash and run all that off, with the idea that you want to have the volume of the first and second worts equal. So anyway, the difference there is that you mix the grains with batch sparging. You mix the grains and the brewing liquor twice, and you run off the grains, or you run off the wort such that the grain bed is exposed. Twice, but the middle one is the one that matters.
So there are proponents of both methods. There's Denny Kahn, who's the biggest proponent of batch sparging, and we've done an interview with Denny. So again, check the archives. And is there a big proponent of continuous sparging? Is there a spokesperson for fly sparging out there?
If there is, I don't know who it would be. I mean, it's sort of the common default, method for commercial brewers, although there are alternate methods. But I'm not aware of anyone at a homebrew level. I mean, there are people certainly who do that and think it's the best way to go, but I'm not aware of anyone who is like, sort of an evangelist for it, a la, Denny, who goes out there and really sort of, he's worked a lot with the method, he likes it, and he's explained its virtues to homebrewers. I'm not sure if there's anyone, the flip side of him out there for fly sparging.
But the whatever method you use, that's going to be the one that you're an advocate for, and that's pretty much borne out on the discussions on the More Beer forum that I read, where you jumped in there too as well, to, kind of defending the article. But the thing that got people's attention, I think, was there was one comment that Steve made in there about fly sparging giving you a better quality wort, and that, I think, it got several people's attention.
Yeah, I think maybe some of the people reading the article are overly hung up on that phrase. What Steve argues in the article is that in batch sparging, when you drain the grain bed, you've got a very large surface area that is exposed to oxygen. All the little individual grains are exposed, and they've got wort clinging to them still, and that provides the opportunity for oxidation to occur. And, oxidation of wort compounds is something that has been studied extensively at, commercial level, and it's shown to be, something detrimental, and it's something that commercial brewers, have, they've taken strides to reduce, oxygen exposure of hot wort in their breweries. And, what Steve is pointing out is that, this batch sparging, which doesn't really have a commercial, it used to be apparently a common commercial technique, but I think the only brewery that anyone has mentioned that uses it today is Miller, which, I don't know, kind of baffles me. But then again, I think their Milwaukee brew house is like really, really old. I mean, like the building is. I don't know. They may have upgraded it, and there may be some reason they're doing it, but I haven't heard that. But anyway, it doesn't attract. There hasn't been really anyone studying it. A brewing scientist studying batch sparging because it's not a common modern sparging technique for commercial brewers. And so what Steve was pointing out was really the potential, given that you've got oxygen, you've got air, you've got, all the precursors for oxidation are there, and, pointing that out. And I think some people saw it, and I guess in retrospect, maybe this was foreseeable. Some people saw it like a slap at their brewing technique, or, like an attack on them personally, which it wasn't. It was just, an effort to bring, some worthwhile information to homebrewers and to have them decide, what they want to do. One thing I would point out is that, in the article we mentioned that, commercial brewers have taken a lot of strides to reduce, oxygen and hot wort coming together in their brewery. Especially, there's two things to think about when you think about oxygen, oxidation and wort. And that's that as temperatures increase, the rate of reactions, and any reactions, but specifically oxidation reactions will increase. But conversely, as temperature increases, oxygen solubility decreases. So, for example, nobody worries about oxidation when you're boiling, not, or at least not from exposure to air, because, although the wort's very hot, it's also, at equilibrium, less than 1 part per million of oxygen can dissolve into, boiling water, and the figures has to be somewhat similar for wort. Mm-hmm. But when you get in the range of, roughly 120 to 160 degrees Fahrenheit, you're in a range where, it's still hot enough that if any oxygen is present, these reactions are going to happen very quickly. But it's cool enough that some small amount of air can actually dissolve into the wort. I think at mash temperatures, at mash temperatures, water will hold about 3 to 4 parts per million of oxygen. And given that wort is mostly water, I think that's probably a pretty good guess for, what that figure would be.
Now, we've done an experiment with hot side aeration through the work of Brian Warren over in Denver, and you helped take part in that as well. And
I remember that.
And we did find that there was initially some effects of hot side aeration on the flavor of the beer, but I mean, they really abused that beer. But we also found out that over time, since the beer was bottle conditioned, since the yeast was still in there, those effects were diminished. So it may be that commercial brewers have more to lose with hot side aeration because their beers are filtered, and that way the yeast won't have time to, or wouldn't be there to mitigate those effects of hot side aeration. And again, you can check the archives for the whole series of those experiments. But let's talk about the method that Steve is employing to, at least in his mind, mitigate the effects of oxidation on his wort. And what he's come up with is a kind of a hybrid between batch sparging and fly sparging. How does that work?
Could I say one thing about hot side aeration first?
Sure.
That the experiment that we tasted was very interesting. But like you said, the brewer had to really go out of his way to induce the hot side aeration. And one thing this article doesn't deal with is the degree of change between oxidation in continuously sparged wort and batch sparge wort. It's entirely possible that, either the difference is too small to detect, or it's possible, and this would be my guess, is how it's going to work out, that it'll be a small but detectable change, but it'll be something that, brewers will, decide for themselves if the traditional selling point of batch sparging is it's very simple, very straightforward. And some people may, just decide, well, hey, I'm not going to go to the bother of that for, this small difference. Mm-hmm. And also you're very, very right that commercial brewers have a different, take on oxidation, especially any kind of oxidation. And, the kind of oxidation we would expect with batch sparging would be similar to HSA, which is usually more strictly of a wort thing, but it's the same idea. You've got heat and oxygen and wort coming together. Commercial brewers, their beer is packaged, they send it off, and it may sit warm on a shelf. It may be lucky enough to be cooled, but it also may sit on a shelf for quite a while before the customer buys it. And things like any oxidative problems, especially that develop late in the game, are something that commercial brewers are going to take very seriously. Whereas, depending on your homebrew consumption, you might not. If you go through a keg in, a couple months, you're probably not going to worry that, in 6 or 8 months it would have gone bad. Mm-hmm. That doesn't make sense. So, there are different, sensibilities and they have reasons for them between commercial brewers and home brewers. And, I think the point in the article wasn't to tell people like you must do it this way or you must do it that way, but to give people the information to decide for themselves.
So with that disclaimer, talk about Steve's hybrid method.
Right. Steve has, he's a guy who knows a lot about brewing in general, and he's also been over to Germany and toured some of the breweries over there. Okay, so what Steve has discovered was a method of sparging that at least some breweries over in Germany use, and actually quite a few brew pubs in the U.S. use. And the idea is it's sort of a hybrid method between batch sparging and fly sparging. The idea is that you mash, and then you maybe add some sparge water on top of the mash water, and you run off the first wort, but only to the point that the water or the liquid is just on top of the level of the grain bed. Right, you don't drain it until the grain bed is exposed. Then you'll add another, layer another dose of batch sparge water on top of that, and then run that off down again till you're at the top of the grain bed. And you can, depending on how much sort of headspace you've got in your batch tun or your mash tun, you can, you can decide on how many different batches of water you want to add. Steve says he uses about 3, fairly big additions and runs off the wort that way. I've actually been doing this method just as a, sort of jury-rigged thing that works in my brewery. And I usually do it a simple way where I run off the first wort until it's at the top of the grain bed, which, if you're a home brewer who typically uses fairly thick sort of mash consistencies, a lot of times when you run off the first wort, that might be a very small amount of wort. Mm-hmm. But anyway, then I'll just add a gallon of sparge water to the top of the mash, just sort of pour it on as gently as I can, run off a gallon, add another gallon, and go that way. I mean, I let the wort run off continuously, and then there's, I have my stir stick in the kettle that tells me how much I've run off, and every gallon mark I hit, I just add another gallon. And so that's somewhat Steve's method and mine, which are just the same thing. Just, I add a few more, quite a few small additions, and he adds, smaller number of large additions. It's, a little bit of a hybrid between batch sparging and fly sparging in that you're adding instead of adding, water continuously, you're adding it in batches. The difference, of course, is that you're not in traditional batch sparging. You're exposing the grain bed each time, and you're also mixing up the brewing liquor and the grains. And in the method that Steve mentions, you just layer the water on top. You don't, once you start running off wort, you don't disturb the grain bed.
So are there any other advantages other than the potential of oxygen exposure to doing this method?
Hard to tell. The German author Kunze, who he's got his own German textbook of brewing. There's also an English translation that I have. He mentions that method, the sort of modified batch sparging method, might actually be slightly more efficient. But he also says that fly sparging produces better quality wort, less color pickup, better flavor, and more stability. But the sort of annoying thing, if you've ever read Kunz's book, is he never gives any references. So you just sort of either have to assume that he's right and knows what he's talking about, because you have no opportunity to go read the original research. But that's his opinion. As you've seen from reading the online discussions, a lot of people have a lot of other opinions.
And I saw that Denny's going to write a letter to the editor for the next issue, and you're planning on doing some experiments to actually test out the methods.
Yeah, I was excited when I read the article, because I originally, when I had contacted Steve, I sort of gave him an open-ended assignment and just said, why don't you compare these two methods? And I was at the time thinking it would mostly be like a comparison of extract efficiency or something. But when the article came in, I was like, wow, that's really interesting. And I called Ashton Lewis, our technical editor, and I had a long discussion with him about oxidation in brewing and sort of the history of the brewing science investigations into it, and how brewers have changed to avoid changed their brew houses designs to avoid oxygen. And I was really excited because I've been looking for a while for some experiment to do to present in BYO. I had a couple ideas about doing a color experiment, and I think we had a hot side aeration experiment planned at one time, and a couple other little ones. But when I saw this, I thought, hey, here's a great opportunity to do an experiment that, one, I just would enjoy carrying out an experiment, and two, I think a lot of people would be interested in the results, and also the results are not known at any scale. A lot of proposed homebrew experiments are sort of duplicating things that have been done at the commercial level and just seeing, due to the difference in scale, does that change anything? In this case, since no commercial brewer batch sparges, or very few, the brewing scientists haven't really looked into the effects of this versus continuous sparging. So this would be something that would be, at least to my knowledge, the first time anyone's looked into this. So yeah, I'm excited to do that experiment. I'm gonna try to find a week sometime soon that I can take off and spend Monday cleaning brewing equipment, cleaning fermenters, blah blah blah, and then brew Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Brew 2 batch sparged beers over that period. Brew 2 continuous sparged beers over that period. Use the same ingredients from the same sack of grain from on the same equipment with the same everything being as identical as I can possibly make it, with the exception of altering or having the experimental variable be the lautering method. So it should be fun.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to actually see some data, because there's a lot of talk back and forth on the forums about which is better, and well, my beers are, I've been doing this for 20 years and my beers are great, and it would be interesting to see head to head how these three methods turn out.
Yeah, well, on the one hand, I mean, you have the theory of oxidation and how oxygen interacts negatively with wort in a brewery, and that's the theory of that, and a commercial scale of practice of that is well established. But on the other hand, some of the people were saying, well, you haven't shown exactly that this kind of oxygen exposure, at this scale, amounts to anything. I mean, my sort of criticism would be, why would it be any different? Why would, hot wort and oxygen react any differently at a homebrew level than it would at a commercial level? But, there's always a difference between theory and reality. And, sometimes theories, no matter how well developed they are or how, well they seem to mesh with common wisdom, sometimes they just don't pan out. Mm-hmm. So I think this will be an interesting experiment, and it'll be one that, from my standpoint, it'll be nice because either way, with the result, it's a publishable thing. If there is a noticeable difference, I can write up the article and publish it, and that'll be, interesting. But if there isn't a noticeable difference, that's a result too. That sometimes experiments with negative results, aren't, nobody cares. If you try some sort of something and it doesn't make a difference, unless there's some pre-existing argument about the method, a lot of times people won't care. So, yeah, I'm excited, and I'll be excited to have, 20 gallons of pale ale to drink afterwards too. So that can't be all bad.
Yeah, that's the benefit of doing homebrew experiments. You can drink the results.
That's why it's better than, trying to cure cancer or anything like that, You don't get to. I guess you could drink a lot of beer after trying to cure cancer, but here.
Yeah, I would. If someone were to cure cancer, I would buy them a beer. How about that?
There you go.
All right. Well, thanks, Chris. We look forward to the results.
Okay. Yeah. So do I.
Well, thanks again to Chris and his cat for joining us. Might have heard his cat in the background a little bit. We'll look forward to the results of Chris's experiments. If you want to pick up a free issue of Brew Your Own, just click on the BYO ad on basicbrewingradio.com. If you decide to subscribe after receiving your magazine, you'll be helping to support this podcast, which is always a good thing. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. And check out your email address on the form to make sure that it's correct. And you can also check out our low-tech lagering and decoction mashing DVD on our shop, basicbrewingshop.com, where you can see Steve do a single-step decoction mash, and you can follow me through a lager fermentation in the middle of summer, where I don't use a dedicated chest freezer. There are also our original DVDs in Basic Brewing Introduction to Extract Home Brewing. We walk you through the extract brewing process step by step from boiling to bottling. And in Basic Brewing Stepping into All Grain, we take you through the all grain process from milling your grain to collecting your wort. And we do batch sparging and fly sparging. So you can see the difference between those two right there. We've also got combo deals to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. You can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com, and if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order it online in our shop at basicbrewingshop.com. Got hats and shirts, too. And thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Freddy and the Ignormus and Garmin 3-finger friction mount for Garmin GPS units. Thanks again, everybody. Remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. We appreciate your support. That's all until next week. Till then, thanks for listening. I'm James Spencer, production help for Basic Brewing Radio, and our website is provided by our buddy Kelly Dodson down there in Austin, Texas. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time. So long.